my brother, this is kind of like always like my kind of like the before and after in my life. My brother passed away in 2015 from pediatric cancer. And for me, I had a hard time living in fantasy worlds because I felt like if my mind went down a path, I might not be able to reel it back in. So I kind of had a hard time writing. And I was in a slump for a while. And it was for, 13 years of my life at that point. So more than half of my life, I had been a writer. Like that was my identity. Everyone knew like she's always got a notebook with her. Like she's always jotting down ideas. And for about 3 years, I was in a complete slump. I just couldn't get myself to go there. And then I took just a stab at writing nonfiction.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Writers Drinking Whiskey, your literary happy hour, the only show on the internet featuring killer moms, killer authors, and killed bottles. I am your host, William R. Hincy, and joining me today, I am really honored to have Amanda R. Woomer with me. Amanda, I think I hit the last name, but there's always a pause when I think it through, but I think I nailed it.
You nailed it.
Very good. Very good. So welcome to the bar. Let me give you the, I used to say the 10-cent version, but I think with inflation and shrinkflation and whatever inflation things we're talking about, it's probably like a $10 version now. But so you're the author of, I think it's nearly 20 books. We mostly focus dark history, paranormal, women's history, and Victoriana. You're an anthropologist. You have the Spook-Eats travel website. I think that's dedicated to the paranormal as well. And then you have the Feminine Macabre. I think that's an anthology, right? Because I told you before this show, I always pull back the curtain. I need a curtain effect. So when I do this, like I stalk websites. So I'm like, oh, what's interesting here? And everyone always has some like little interesting tidbit that I would never know. And always it makes something fun to talk about. So, and then the latest book, as I teased there in the opening, we take this paper out of it, is we have Killer Moms. I love the cover image, by the way. That's true stories of it's all true stories. I just got it yesterday, so full disclosure, I haven't read it because I'm a slow reader and I'm in the middle of another book, and I wouldn't have never read that in one day, anyways. But it's all about moms who kill, correct?
Yes, it's not for the faint of heart, as one might say, for sure.
Very good. So is there anything you'd like to add? Any of the important bits there I might have missed to the $10 bio?
No, I feel like you nailed it. Going back to like your question briefly about the Feminine Macabre, it's not so much an anthology. I describe it as a paranormal, metaphysical, and occult journal. So ladies from all over the world will write about their areas of expertise in all things strange and unusual, hauntings, true crime, witchcraft, tarot, cryptids, all that fun stuff. And then I just kind of put it all together and put it out there into the world for people to be able to learn from. So it's really fun because I get to learn about all these different topics before anyone else. And then being able to give women an opportunity to kind of see their names in print and have a book actually bound for them. It was life-changing for me when I was first starting my literary journey, so I'm glad to be able to kind of pay that forward with that.
Yeah, sure. I love that notion too, because I remember that when I first had a short story published. Geez, I forget all those many years ago now, but that just having it in print, like my name on there, is really neat. So I'm glad you're able to play that forward. That's a wonderful thing. So, all right. So I like to start by placing you in the world here. So maybe you could tell us like generally where you are and what's the best place to get a drink there.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I am born and raised in Buffalo, New York. I've lived overseas. I've lived in China. I've lived in Russia. I've lived in Mongolia, but then I made it back over here to my hometown of Buffalo. I moved back, I think 9 years ago now. And for best place to get a drink, hands down, my favorite place to go get a drink in Buffalo is a goth literary bar known as the Mary Shelley.
Very cool.
It's so good. Like you walk in and there's like this giant portrait of Mary Shelley behind the bar with all these copies of Frankenstein in front of it. And it's cool. It's a queer woman-owned bar right in the heart of Buffalo. It's awesome. They do tons of like pop-up events for small local businesses. They do special themed nights. They have a Krampus night coming up on the holiday season. So it's just a super fun place to be able to go. There's no TVs anywhere. So like there's nothing to distract. You can just sit and have a good conversation with an absinthe or a craft beer or a wine. And it's just, I love it there. So the Mary Shelley, no question.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for that. I love it when it's a ringing endorsement too. You have to go. This was it.
Yes, you have to. There's no other place worth going to.
Very good. Thank you for that. And then, so the question that started this whole crazy journey of writers drinking whiskey, what are we drinking?
So I have with me, I'm a huge Bloody Mary fan. And I'm also a huge Vincent Price fan. So I have Vincent Price's 1972 Bloody Mary recipe. I call it the Lazy Bands Bloody Mary recipe. It's very easy. I have the recipe written down right here. So it is 3 ounces of tomato juice, 2 dashes of Angostura bitters, and 1 jigger of vodka, and you mix and you serve over ice. And it's actually very good. I wasn't sure what the bitters because I don't usually like bitters. But I feel like Vincent Price, he was always doing like ads for Angostura. So you have to throw some little dab here and there. And it's actually very good. So that's what I had to do. I had to do a Vincent Price Bloody Mary.
Oh, very good. Very good. Thank you for that. That's so funny because then I'm really into old fashions. And it's what, 4 ingredients basically, right? It's your rye or your bourbon whiskey, Angostura bitters, some simple syrup, a cherry and a orange, peel basically. Is like, that's how I make them. Some people do little slight variations. Sometimes use a lemon peel, whatever. But yeah, they add something. But if you go too heavy, it's what I learned at the home bar here. If you do too much, you just destroyed it. But it works in there somehow. I don't know what the alchemy is, but it works.
Exactly. There's some sort of witchcraft or magic happening.
Very good. Also, so then I wonder if you could maybe just kind of, I know we were talking kind of pre-show here that you had the idea of being a writer when you were 12, but I wonder if you could kind of just walk us through kind of the writing journey, the author journey leading up to today.
Yeah. So I first seriously started writing when I was about 12 years old. I had nothing else in my mind of what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be a writer. In my childhood and adolescence, I was very much a fantasy girl. I would write nothing but fantasy, and I would consume nothing but fantasy as well. And then as I got older, I branched out a little bit more into horror. Again, as I started consuming horror, I started producing it as well. And then my brother, this is kind of like always like the before and after in my life. My brother passed away in 2015 from pediatric cancer. And for me, I had a hard time living in fantasy worlds. Because I felt like if my mind went down a path, I might not be able to reel it back in. So I kind of had a hard time writing. And I was in a slump for a while. And it was for, 13 years of my life at that point. So more than half of my life, I had been a writer. Like that was my identity. Everyone knew like she's always got a notebook with her. Like she's always jotting down ideas. And for about 3 years, I was in a complete slump. I just couldn't get myself to go there. And then I took just a stab at writing nonfiction, where it wasn't, my mind didn't have to go anywhere because I'm just kind of looking up facts and sharing things that have already happened. I'm not coming up with this. I'm not making this up. I'm just sharing this information. I'm taking it and transferring it over to readers. And that was kind of the magic combination. So my very first book that I had out was A Haunted Atlas of Western New York, which came out 5 years ago this month, actually. And it was, just basically a travel guide to all of the folklore and haunted locations throughout the Buffalo area and, all around the region. Because I figured I don't have any money to travel anywhere. or do tons of in-depth research. Let's write what you know. I know Western New York history. I know a lot of the ghost stories. So I started doing that. And it was very, very well received, especially in the Buffalo area. So that kind of it assured me that I can still be a writer. I can keep doing this. And since then, Killer Moms is actually my 22nd book that I've written in the last 5 years. So I don't know how to relax at all. Whenever I do events and people see my table just full of books, they're like, wait, you wrote these? And I'll be like, yeah. And they'll say, all of these? I'm like, well, I have like this weird thing where if I like sit down and just try to relax, I feel guilty. So I have to work on something. I have to write something. So, but it's been fun to do, haunted stuff, like weird dark history. Like I have a book, Harlots and Hauntings, which is the history of sex work. And then 11 places haunted by former sex workers. So like very interesting, unique things. I started working with Victorian mourning customs, and I have several books out on that. And then that kind of segued into more of like the darker history, true crime area. So it's been fun to kind of go from like the ghosty girl to the, Victoriana to weird history to true crime. It's been a really interesting progression. And in a way, I'm kind of proud of Killer Moms, just because firstly, it's the most difficult book I've ever had to write, understandably so, given the content. But I don't think, my brother died 9 years ago now. I don't think 9 years ago I would have been able to write a book like this, because it is very traumatic stories. And again, not for the faint of heart at all. So to be able to go back, 9-10 years ago to thinking I'm never going to be able to write a book again, to not only having a book like this out, but 21 other books in between is just, it's really cool. And I am proud, I don't want to like be like, oh, I'm so cool. But like just like a little pat on the back, be like, way to go.
Sure.
You did it. Yeah. So that's kind of the journey in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, and you should be proud. I mean, it's hard to write one book. So the fact that you've written 22 is, it's always tell people, sometimes you have people on the show and I have all walks of life, right? I want like writers from the beginning. I want writers that have been doing it for, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough to have that kind of that swath, and I really love it. But sometimes the people that are like newer be like, oh, I don't know if I can call myself a writer yet. And it's like, well, if you're doing the work, you're a writer, right? Yeah. That's hard enough. If you're not doing the work, you're just thinking about it, then you're just someone thinking about writing, right? But when you sit down and you write it, and you get a book done, you get 2 done, you're doing it. I mean, the rest of it is academic, right? Like who knows how successful you're going to be or not, but what you can do is keep putting the work in. So 22 books in that short amount of time is pretty amazing. So, and I know it's been 9 years, but my condolences on your loss, and it's never,
thank you.
Never easy. My wife actually works at a cancer hospital down the road here. And my dad has colon cancer. So, it's a trial, so, but it's wonderful to kind of see the perseverance, too, and be able to keep going. So, good for you. So, not that you need me to say that, like this guy you just know this podcast, but I'm going to be the guy that says it right now to you, so, awesome. So I wonder then, because you talked about, it being kind of a haunted travel log, the first book of Western. So completely sidebar question here. Do you happen to know or have heard of an author named Linda Freeman?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. She was on the show, but she did like Hudson Valley. Okay. And she did a bunch of, there was the Hudson Valley UFO flap, like I think mid 80s, around there. She wrote a book about that. She witnessed something that was on that. So when you're talking about Buffalo, I know it's not the exact area, but I was like, I wonder if you guys, exactly. But yeah, so you said it was a travel log, and then you've moved around all over the world, right? I think you've touched all the continents, essentially. Yeah, I'll be right with you. Oh, hello. Fancy meeting you here on the show I host and edit. William R. Hincy. I'm taking a break from my hosting gig at Writer's Week of Whiskey to look oh so stylish and oh so suave in my Firmoo glasses. As you guessed it, that is today's sponsor. If you'd like to get a 50% off already affordable glasses with tons of selection, you can use the promo code maybe here if you're on the YouTube box and you see my hands. If you're listening on a podcast, you can find it in the description. So check out the link, get your 50% off, support the show, and support restocking the bar behind me because it is an expensive chore to keep that puppy up. Thanks, everyone. And as we used to say in the 80s, back to your regularly scheduled programming. So I wonder then maybe we start with Spook-Eats. Since that was kind of the paranormal travel log here. So, but before we get into the details, I wonder just generally, like, what role has travel played in your life? Right, like those are huge moves, right? I mean, there's moving across country, which is huge, and then there's moving to Mongolia or Russia or China and things. It's massively different. Kind of
No, so travel has always been a huge part of my life. I would say writing was number one and travel was number two. Again, I was 12 years old, so clearly 12 was a very formative year for me. I went to England and France for the first time when I was 12 years old. And I just was completely bitten by the travel bug. I studied abroad all throughout college. I studied abroad in Austria. I studied abroad in Sweden. Like any chance I had to like not have to go to school at my school and I could go somewhere else, I did. So I traveled all over Europe. I've been to parts of South America. And then once I graduated college, I knew that I didn't want to just like have like an office job or something like that. So, and my RA from when I was in college, she had gone overseas to teach English in China. And she was coming back and leaving a vacant spot at her university. So she encouraged me to apply for her job as an English teacher at Hangzhou Normal University in Hangzhou, China. And like she put in a reference for me and I got hired. So I moved to China after graduating from college. And I was there for about 2 years before my brother ended up passing away. And we ended up moving back very briefly before going to Russia, which was a terrible decision. Then we went to Mongolia. But China was fantastic. I absolutely loved living in China. I actually met my husband there, he's from Minnesota. He was another English teacher. We just happened to just cross paths. You went to China to find your husband. I don't know. So travel for me is absolutely huge. I absolutely love going to other countries, exploring other cultures. I went to school for anthropology. So, learning about other cultures, and particularly for me, I liked to study different death customs of how different cultures approach death and dying and funerals and grief and all that. So I was able to study that while I was traveling as well. For me, whenever I travel somewhere, I always like to try to find the darker places to go visit, or like the haunted places, the seedier places. So for me, kind of like the spooky ghost stories and travel just go so hand in hand with each other. That I absolutely love traveling. And yeah, who knew? 2002 was a very formative year for Amanda. Started writing and traveling.
Right, very good. That is funny. So how did, I guess there's so much there I have questions on, but let me succinct it down. How did that kind of change the way you saw the world kind of generally? Right? Like I know you were like the travel as a child as 12, right? Already kind of blew your mind. When I can completely imagine that. But how did then the travel to, China, that was great. Russia, that I guess wasn't so great. How did that change at all? Like the way you see the world, or you see yourself in the world?
I mean, it definitely did. I made some enemies growing up when I would say things like, America doesn't have everything figured out. Like, I lived in this country and they're doing a lot better. Or I lived in this country and they got things kind of figured out. So from a very young age, I think I felt more just kind of like aware and not thinking that like, we're the most important place in the world, or, we've got everything figured out. Like, it's okay to admit that we don't have everything figured out, and we can look to our friends and our neighbors to kind of grow and change and evolve. And I think that's a big thing that I have kind of taken for myself, is that I never want to be the same person. Like, if I look back at who I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I'm a completely different person based off of the people I've met and the places I've been to and the things I've seen and the things I've experienced. And I feel like if you stop changing and growing and learning and evolving, you might as well just roll over and crawl into your coffin now, because what's the point? The point is
right.
to explore and learn and grow. And it's cool because, I grew up in a very, very, very strict, like, Christian household. So nowadays when I'm writing about like killer moms and paranormal stuff,
right.
My parents are super cool with it now. But like, again, like 20 years ago, this would not have been on the horizon at all. But it's cool to like see, like, because my parents allowed me to be able to go on these adventures as a young girl and then ultimately as a young woman as I got older. And I came back with this mentality of, always change, always grow, always evolve. They've kind of taken that on as well. And it's fascinating to see, like, my dad is 65 years old, and to see how he has changed over the last 15, 20 years is not only mind-boggling, but so admirable, because especially I feel like when people get older, they get a little bit more stubborn in their ways. And like, that's not the case. And I do think it's because that they allowed me to travel and that they themselves have also traveled. So I do think that it is really helpful to be able to experience other cultures and other ways of thinking and other ways of doing things, so that you can kind of take that and turn it kind of into like the patchwork quilt that is you as a person.
Sure. It's so funny. It reminded me, I was listening to Hidden Brain. I don't know if they still do the podcast, but it was I think he was a psychologist, and he would have guests on. Like, usually they wrote a book, right? And he would talk about like what they found and what they found in their research. And they had someone on that talked about that. He goes, I forget the years. I'm going to use 12 years because it was such a formative year for you. But he was like, if you ask someone from 0 to 12, how much did you change? It's obvious, right? You went from a baby to almost a teenager, right? You're a preteen. 12 to 24, well, people still feel it's obvious. It starts as they start to hit the mid 20s to 30s. People, when they were 24, said, I don't think I'll change much in the next 10, 12 years, whatever the study was. Well, then when they asked them again 12 years later, they said, no, I'm a lot different.
Yeah.
And the researchers thought that'll slow down. But actually, that trend kind of kept up. So even people when they were 60s, like, you know what? I am a lot different than when I was 52 or whatever. I think it was maybe 10 years. I forget. But, but it is really interesting to see that, because it is like, if you keep changing, you keep living, right? Like life is change and things. So that's cool to see the parents rubbing off on the parents too. It's fun that it goes both ways. Awesome. Where was the scariest travel place? Was there, and it doesn't have to be necessarily like haunted, like maybe it was scary in some real world way, or like what was was there any time that like stands out?
I mean, the scariest experience that I ever had, and I'm not throwing any shade on the city at all, I absolutely loved it. So I studied abroad in Vienna, Austria. I think I was 20 or 21 years old, and I was coming back from seeing a musical. And it was late at night. I was by myself because nobody else wanted to go with me. Nobody else wanted to see a German musical about vampires. It was weird. I don't know why. But so I was on the subway, and this guy was talking to me, and my minor in college was German, so I was able to somewhat understand, but he had a Viennese dialect where I was kind of like, I don't know what you're saying, really. So I was trying to communicate with him, like, not interested. He was basically asking me out for a drink, and I was like, no, like, dude, it's like midnight, like, I want to go home, I'm tired. And he ended up following me through like the train station to like a different terminal, and like up the stairs, down the street. And like the whole time in my head, I'm thinking like, he got nothing on me. Like I got a program from the musical and a poster hanging up on my wall over here. Like, it's all I got. So eventually I made it to my hostel, and one of my friends that I was studying abroad with, I happened to run into him, and he saw that I was flustered. I was like, that guy behind me has been following me for the last 20 minutes. So he, kind of like did the whole class to like pretend to be like the boyfriend thing, like there was over my shoulder. I was like, thank you, Ryan. Thank you. So that was like my scariest encounter. But again, like it was Vienna. Like it's a beautiful city. I absolutely love it. I would 100% go back. just watch out for the one guy in the subway system.
Exactly. Watch out for that guy.
Watch out for that one.
It's funny. I was talking to my I have 2 adult daughters, so Rhiannon and Cassie. Actually, we have 3 now. I guess Michaela's an adult now. She just turned 18. That's why it slipped my mind more, and she still lives here. But I guess there was that, like, would you rather run into a man or a bear or something?
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't go on social media. I think they mentioned this thing to me, and I'm like, oh, well, there's pretty like little danger for either, right? Like, you're out hiking, you see a guy, like, they go up, you see a guy. I'd rather see the bear because it's more interesting, you know? But it's like, when you phrase it that way, it's like, oh, what's that guy doing? Is he following you like that guy? And
like,
it's
why are you following me? I said no, thank you. So in that moment, if I was walking in the streets of Vienna, I'd rather see the bear.
You would rather see the bear for sure, for sure. Yeah. What was the most fun?
Ooh, probably. So I always say my 2 favorite countries I've ever been to is Scotland and Nepal. And I would have to just like go Nepal. I absolutely loved it. There's a saying among the people who are like hiking in the mountains, and they say that you come to Nepal for the mountains, but you return for the people. 1,000%. Like, the Himalayas are breathtaking. Like, I cannot describe just the magnitude of them. Like, they are just mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling how big they are. But the people there are so sweet, so kind, so welcoming. I said, like, I would go back to Nepal in an absolute heartbeat. Like, there's no question in my mind. Like, there are other countries that I've been to where I'm like, it was okay. I don't really need to go back anytime soon. If you said to me, like, tomorrow you could go back to Nepal, yes, please. Thank you. And it was just like, the food is delicious. Obviously, the scenery is stunning. The people are just absolutely lovely. The culture is beautiful. Just everything about it. Yeah, I would have to say Nepal for me was just the funnest. And like, I'm not a particularly physically fit human being. I'm a writer, so I'm relatively sedentary in life. And I just remember our guide, who became a very good friend of mine. I still keep in touch with him, 11 years later. He knew I'm not a very physically fit person. And I just remember he would always say, jam, jam, which means kind of like, let's go slowly, slowly. We'll go slow. We'll get there when we get there. And I just loved that mentality of like, there is no rush. Stop up and look at the scenery around you because you are in the Himalayas. And it was just this beautiful way of thinking. So now whenever like I'm with my family and we're doing something or we're trying to get somewhere or we're going hiking, we all say jump, jump, slowly, slowly because of my trip to the Himalayas. And, we hiked only 4 days. We didn't go to base camp or anything, but I had asked so our guide, I was like, do you think, looking at me, could I have done it? And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. He's like, usually people who are retired in like their 60s come and do this. It's very easy. It's a hiking trail. Other than the second day, it's 2.5 hours, just like incline, which that was horrible. And that's when I was like, I'm very much not a physically fit person. But I just absolutely loved it. And if anyone ever gets the opportunity to go, I know it's like a big feat because getting over there is very expensive. But once you're in Nepal, it's very, very affordable. I think I lived off of like $2 a day once I was there. It's just getting over there is expensive. But I got over there from China, so it was only like a $300 flight.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah, that helps. That's funny. Yeah, my wife and I went for a hike 2 weeks ago, and I lift weights. I like to ride my bike. I used to mountain bike, but I usually just do like we're right on the foothills. I'm in California, so if you know where Pasadena is, where the Rose Parade and stuff, those mountains they always show in the background. That's the San Gabriel Mountains, and we're just like 10 miles east of there. So I ride up. I can do hills in like the neighborhoods. And also my old man self does. I do these hills. And so I'm thinking like, oh, we can go do this hike. So we go do it, and it was fine. But man, the next day, like every muscle that I usually don't use.
Yes. I remember that in Nepal being like, muscles are hurting that I didn't even know I had.
It was such a different, like, we were just like, oh, I didn't know there's muscles in front of my calf. I thought it was just like bones sitting there.
Yeah, who knew? I'm not a doctor. I don't know.
Where was the best watering hole you came to in like your travels?
Ooh, so I would have to say, okay. Um, so for me, one of my favorite places was the House of Trembling Madness, which right there, the name is the coolest.
Sure.
And that is in York, England.
Okay.
And we joked because when we walked in, I felt like I was in Gaston's tavern from Beauty and the Beast. It was just taxidermied animals everywhere.
Wow, okay.
It was just like, wow, like antlers everywhere. This is impressive. But it was cool because it was like this old historic building. I want to say it was built in like the 1300s or something crazy like that, where I'm like, okay, like the oldest building we have around me is like 1804. Cool. And they had really, really interesting beers and ciders. And then the food, like they had a charcuterie board that had like wild boar on it. And I'm like, I have to try wild boar. I must while I am here. So that was really cool. And then another place that I thought was fascinating was called Yield Trip to Jerusalem, which is in Nottingham. And years ago, back when I wrote fiction, I actually wrote a book which has never seen the light of day. And my husband really wants me to try to get it published. But it's a retelling of the Robin Hood legend where Robin Hood is actually a girl, and it changes the dynamic with all of the relationships with all the other characters. So, and in that book, I kind of set the main area at Yield Trip to Jerusalem. So I had written this book and spent years in this world and all this. I mean, it's a historical fiction. So I tried to make it as historically accurate as possible. So then to go to the actual pub, which is supposed to be one of the oldest pubs, I think like 1192 is when it was allegedly opened, was just, it felt like a sort of pilgrimage in a way. It sounds silly, but it was just so cool. And it's built into the rock face that Nottingham Castle sits on top of. So you're walking through and it looks like a regular pub at first, but then you actually go down into like the sitting area and it's literally caves. And these tables and chairs are just nestled into these nooks and crannies in these caves. It's very cool. So those two places in England were the first ones to pop into my mind for sure.
Right. Yeah, sure. No, that sounds amazing. You know, it's funny you say that too, because when you go somewhere where there's actually like old things, you know, like I've been like, you know, I was born in West Virginia and I saw a family out there, but I grew up mostly in California. My dad was in the Air Force, so a bit of a military brat early on, and then we settled out here. And so now like the only thing old in California is the missions. So occasionally go to a mission and there's an old thing there. Otherwise, like our house was 1959 and we're an old house, you know, around here. So it is neat when you go like we were I forget if it was the last time we went to England or not, but we went up to Edinburgh and it's just how old that is, and the city on top of the city and going around, and it's just amazing.
And the old town and the new town, and the new town is from like the 18th century, and you're like, that's still really old.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's really amazing. And then I did notice, speaking of watering holes and speaking of spirits, that one of the books in your repertoire there is the Spirit Guide, America's Haunted Breweries, Distilleries, and Wineries.
Yes.
So very near and dear to my heart. What was that research like?
Oh, so it was a little bit of torture for me because I was pregnant while I was writing that book. Yes. Can I tell you, it was pure torture because the whole time, like a pecan bourbon, that sounds delicious. I'm so thirsty. Like so many times I'd be like, oh, I have to try that and that and that. And it was funny because I actually wrote that during lockdown and COVID.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I actually, instead of like traveling to all these locations, I worked with all of the locations, which was super fun to be able to do. I worked with them all just through email. And like asked them, like, what are the drinks that you recommend? What's your history? What's your story? Like, what do you want people to know about you? So it was really fun to like get this story almost straight from the horse's mouth in a way. And then to be able to like turn around and be able to like have copies of the books in some of these locations was really cool. But it was painful to be doing that while I was pregnant, being like, I just want a drink right now.
That is funny. Yeah, that is painful. You think you picked the wrong order of those books.
Seriously. Oh, it's torture, pure torture. Oh my gosh.
Oh, that is funny. What do you think? So getting to like the spirits, like I guess not the liquor spirits at this point, but the ghostly kind of spirits. Are you, so I know I've had people on this show before that have written like ghost books and think it's complete nonsense, right? So do you like think there's such thing as ghosts? Are you on the skeptical side?
I always say that I'm kind of like Fox Mulder. I want to believe. I really want to believe. And I think a lot of that stems from having lost my brother. That there's like that desire to have like some sort of connection that's still there. And, you know, after he died, I did start a lot of paranormal investigations. You know, I would host public ghost hunts at local places in Buffalo. Obviously, while I was researching a lot of books, I would go to the locations and try to, you know, see if there was anything there for myself. Honestly, I mean, I was doing that for years and years and years, and I can count on one hand the number of times something happened that made me actually like stop and scratch my head. Most of the time, I like to be a wet blanket and be like, no, that's not a picture of anything. No, that's not a recording of anything. Like, that's a bug. That's dust. That's a 200-year-old building just settling. But I did have a cool interaction, I think, with my brother. So I do think that there might be something out there and something to it. Is it as prevalent as, you know, like paranormal reality TV shows make it seem? I don't necessarily think so. Again, like I can't tell you the number of investigations I went on and like events that I hosted where like nothing happens. It's actually kind of really boring.
Right.
You know, so, but like, you know, I've been to places like Gettysburg. And the first time I went to Gettysburg, I think I was like 14 years old. And even as a kid, you could just sense like the heaviness and the somberness of that location and just what it meant and what it still means. So I think that might have something to do with it. I do think in a lot of instances, people bring things in with them, whether it's preconceived notions or, you know, I mean, I feel like if you're going into a place looking for a ghost, you're going to find it with every creak, every sound, every shadow. So again, I've had a few encounters or a few things happen that I was like, the heck was that? But again, they're very few and far between. So I would like to believe that there's something, you know, and again, I've only had like one thing really happen that like really like kind of like not convinced me necessarily, but I was like, you know what? If nothing else ever happens to me, I'm good. Like that's enough for me. So that's just kind of, I'm kind of on the fence. You know, I want to believe, but I also like, I think a bit of skepticism is necessary.
For sure.
Otherwise, you could just go off the deep end with it.
Yeah. Well, and I think what happens with those shows, the quote unquote reality TV kind of shows, is like they have to have something happen every time for the episode. So it's like I think I have the Sasquatch behind me. The Sasquatch shows do that too. So it's like every knock in the woods, oh, that's Sasquatch, and
that's it. It's gotta be.
And I've had a few. A guy that wrote a book on a Sasquatch on the show, and when you actually talk to them and you realize, like, oh no, they're not the ones that are trying to do that. They like really go out, and a lot of them have had sincere like experiences and things. That's what always interests me is the. I do tend to think that there is like. I guess this would be more of a belief. I sometimes hate the way we merge belief with think. I do believe that there's more, you know, afterlife. I believe very strongly that there's a soul and things. But like Bigfoot, I think just from all the stories and things and the little like the trace evidence of things, I think there is something out there. I don't know what it is. I'm sure a high percentage of them are misidentifications. I think there's a tiny percent that's people that are just fooling, you know. There is certainly some, but I don't think most people are bothering with all of that, you know. But it's like, what is that story telling us about like us? What is the possibilities of things out there? So I love all of those stories. I just about the unexplained and everything, just because someone wrote, I need to remember the name of this book. But a naturalist wrote a book called like Where Bigfoot Roams. And he actually doesn't think that there is a Sasquatch out there. But his point with it was that we need to have places so wild that we can still believe that there's monsters roaming, out there.
That. Yeah.
And I think that you need that place in your mind too, is to go, okay, no, I can walk into this place and maybe something can happen that's outside of my experience.
Yeah.
And maybe not. You can also go and hear every creak or whatever it is. So,
brief interlude from the show. As you've heard me say ad nauseum at this point, the very best way to support the show is to buy a book. You're hearing all about my guest work during the show, so now if you want to take a moment to watch a cinematic trailer of one of mine, I'd certainly appreciate it. And if you're intrigued and so inclined, we'll have links where you can pick yourself up a copy. Thanks again, and cheers.
Are we bad people who sometimes do good things? Or good people who do bad things?
and I know maybe it's personal, so if you don't want to tell me, don't tell me, but you did say you had the one experience. Are you comfortable sharing that?
Yeah. So I actually love talking about it. So there was this theater company in Western New York that my brother and I used to work at years and years ago. And it's a theater. All theaters have a good ghost story. You have to. I feel like ever since Phantom of the Opera came out, you got to have a ghost. So we were having just a private ghost hunt. So like all the people who were members of the theater company, we were like, let's get together. Let's go on a ghost hunt. And so like my parents were there. I was there. The owner was there, who's like a second father to my brother. All these cast and crew members. And I was down in the basement and I had two other ladies down there with me. They had gone off to do their own thing on the opposite side of the building. And I was by myself. And for whatever reason, in that single moment, it was just kind of like put on my heart to just like talk to Jed, my brother. Because in my mind, I was like, I'm here. My parents are here. Everyone that Jed ever loved in life is literally under the same roof today. So if he's going to be anywhere, why not here? So I had my digital recorder going and I was already asking questions. And I just said, dude, are you okay? I just need to know that you're okay. And I didn't realize it at the time because I didn't listen to the recording until like weeks later. But I got an answer. I got a voice coming back. And it was very quiet, but it sounded like my brother's voice from when he was little. He died when he was 19, but the voice was from it was very high pitched. And it just sounds like, I'm fine. And that in and of itself was really cool to me. But that same night, in the exact same spot that I was standing in the basement, another woman got a photograph. And she came up to me and my mom afterwards, and she's like, I think I got a photo of Jed. And we were like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And she's like, so she pulls it up on her phone because she was taking the pictures on her cell phone. And she shows it to us. And it is freakish. It's almost a carbon copy of a family photo that we have in like my mom's photo album from a first day of school. And it's weird because it's like this woman would have no access to this. Like she wouldn't have had Photoshop on her phone, like to do this.
Sure.
Because that's what I'm trying to think. Like there has to be some logical explanation, but it's literally this photo into this room with basically flats, screen flats. And it looks like my brother when he is about 11 years old. with his long brown shaggy hair. He's got a green t-shirt on. You can see the collar of his shirt, his backpack. You can even see like his jawline. And it's like, if I had just had that photograph, I would have been happy. But I got the photograph with the voice in the exact same spot at the exact same night. And to me, I'm like, even if it doesn't convince anyone else, that I'm fine with that, because that was enough for me. I got an instantaneous response to my question. I never felt the need to ever like reach out to him again or look for him, because I'm like, that could be a slippery slope. I could see how people would become obsessed with that.
Right.
So I was like, I'm good from here on out. He said he's okay. Therefore, I need to learn to be okay too. So it was very nice and heartwarming. And I like to share that story with people just because I feel like, especially reality TV, makes ghost stories and ghost hunting and paranormal stuff very doom and gloom, very scary. Everything's a demon. And I feel like it doesn't have to be. Like, it can be this really beautiful human connection. So that's why I hosted a lot of events, was for people to kind of have those moments and to kind of like come to their own conclusions or realizations about what could potentially be waiting for us after we died. So I do like to share that story just because it is a bit more heartwarming than, running through an abandoned building, screaming demon.
It's always someone that was murdered,
Yeah, exactly.
Those scary. So, no, that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing it. It reminded me of this. It's funny. It just struck this memory that my son. So as we talk pre-game here, people anyway that's listening to the show's heard the story, so I won't belabor it. But my son William, the eighth. We all have different middle names, so there's no juniors or eighths, I guess, necessarily. But we were playing one day, and I think he was around like 4 or 5. And we're just on the carpet, kind of. He loved trains. He loved Thomas at trains. So I forget if we were playing with Thomas or just his like Hot Wheels, right? But we're on, like, just roaming around with our things, and he was like, Dad, I wish you could just play with me all day long, right? And I don't know what it is about this, the way he said it and how sweet and kind of simple it was, that it just kind of struck me. I was like, man, like, it's almost like what I would imagine heaven to be like, right? Like, could you imagine, like, you get to play with your kids and like kind of be that same age for like some time, or right? Or like, so I was like,
freeze time.
Right. It's just how those moments, it's like I'll never get to play with him as another kid. I get to play with him, loads as an adult, but I don't, I have no idea what like happens like when we die, obviously, right? I think it's the human question. None of us no. But I do think like I think it's way more wondrous than we can imagine. Like, we want to just trying to put this earth on these other things. That's what we do with other cultures. So when we travel, right? We think we're in America. Everyone's exactly. And you realize like, no, not the same. And everyone doesn't. The same thing doesn't happen everywhere. So it's funny because even with like ghosts, we would go places. And actually, we went to the Queen Mary.
Okay.
My wife and I, for our anniversary, which is 45 minutes away down in Long Beach, and she goes, I don't know why don't you ever get afraid like there might be a ghost around? And I'm like, I think the ghost will find me charming. The ghost will like me. And she's like, but living people don't find you charming and like you, so the ghost definitely isn't going to.
Thanks, honey.
But it's one of those things that I appreciate your point. Is why does it always have to be a scary thing? Like if one of the theories is that their souls like coming back, like, well, why are all of them angry and like trying to scare us? So awesome. Thanks. So before we move off, because actually, as you were saying that, it spawned another question here. So with your anthropological studies and like the studies of funeral practices and things, is there any like maybe I just keep it more open-ended, like how has that shaped the way you see kind of death in general and what perhaps happens to us after?
I mean, I think for me, like, studying different cultures and how they approach the process of going from living to dead and then disposing of the body, it shows me that we in America are very bad at just everything revolving around death.
Sure.
We're very bad at it. I feel like as soon as someone gets sick or elderly, we put them away. They're in a hospital, they're in hospice, a nursing home, I think as a society, we're so obsessed with youth and beauty that we try to keep off and keep away aging. And it's like, it's a privilege denied to a lot of people. And I do think that's kind of my bitterness with like my brother having died at 19 years old, this beautiful, healthy, strong young man just struck down by cancer. So like whenever I hear people kind of like complaining about those things, I'm like, you're lucky. You're lucky. Like you have like wrinkles and gray hairs. I don't have gray hair, but
sure.
Like, got green hair. But so, and for me, it wasn't so much studying other cultures, surprisingly, even though like there are so many cultures that do a beautiful job at kind of having everyone be so hands-on with the whole process and saying goodbye and giving that final farewell, whether it's in the form of, standing, watch or holding a vigil over the body or preparing it for burial. I was able, when I was in Nepal, I was actually able to watch a funeral procession go by and watch as the eldest child, lit the funeral pyre. And then you look up and there's ashes falling on you. And it was just, and for me, it's a core memory. Just standing there being like, this is the ashes of that individual. And then once the body burned, they would push the ashes into the river that was a tributary of the Ganges. And it was just so interesting to me to see that. And then when I moved back to the States, and I started really studying Victorian customs for, grief and mourning and death and everything, became absolutely fascinated. I actually have a whole collection of Victorian mourning memorabilia that I travel around with as like a little mini museum to kind of inspire people to have these conversations and ask questions. Why is this pendant made of human hair? Why did they take photos of someone after they died? And my hope is to use these kind of like these quirky pieces of history and these weird things that we're not used to nowadays to inspire these conversations, to talk about death and dying, talk about grief, and I think we are starting to go in a better direction with like the death positivity movement in the States. But I do think we have a very long way to go still, especially to like not necessarily catch up with other people around the world, but just to try to match that level of accepting that it's perfectly natural. It's one of those few guaranteed things in life. You're born, you live, and then you die. Well, you're not really aware of what's happening when you're born, but you can be aware of when you're dying. So why not plan for it? Make it exactly what you want it to be and take the guesswork out of it for the rest of your family. And in the meantime, when those around you are going through their grief and their losses, to kind of give them the grace and understanding to be able to also grieve. Because as society, we don't allow it. A fantastic example I had from a girlfriend of mine. She's from Australia, so it's a little different, but I think very similar to American culture, is when her fiance died very unexpectedly. She was given 2 days of bereavement leave. Fast forward to when Fast forward to when Queen Elizabeth died. And because Australia was part of the Commonwealth, or is part of the Commonwealth, everyone was given 1 day of bereavement leave. So my friend was like, so for a monarch I've never met in my entire life, had no effect on me whatsoever, I got 1 day. And for my soulmate that I built my whole life around, I got 2. And then she was expected to go back to work. And that's kind of how it is here too. It's kind of expected, like, well, you're going to have to move on. You're going to have to get over it. And it's like, no, you shouldn't have to. Again, you're going to grow and you're going to change. I think eventually you don't really ever get over it, but you find ways to cope. You find tricks to get through the day. If a song starts playing on the radio, you find a way to not let it completely make you break down in the cereal aisle at the grocery store, unlike 3 years ago when that was what you were doing. So I think that, at least for me, studying other cultures around the world, but then also the Victorian movement here in the States was very strangely therapeutic for me. And it's been fun to be able to share it with other people with some of my books and the museum itself, just to be able to kind of peek people's interest in these weird customs that some things we still do, some things we don't do, maybe some things we should still do, but we don't. So that's a whole other conversation for a whole other day.
Sure. Well, it made me think too when you're describing the pyre and the ashes coming down is like the importance of ceremony. It's like my wife and I, when we were getting married, we were married. So we were like legally married. Because we actually got legally married on a Sunday after a Steeler game because I'm a Steeler fan and you watch the Steelers. So then you go get married, But she had a doctor's appointment, her first doctor's appointment for our son, the next day. So we needed it to be backdated for the insurance. So like, okay, it has to be today because tomorrow is doctor's appointment. So we went and filled out paperwork. We had some family that came with us. So we went to Taco Bell and had our reception, and we were struggling. Just tried to make ends meet. We're like a blended family. So the older two daughters are mine. The youngest daughters was hers. So they're all ours at this point. But hers from a previous relationship, and then we had our son. And we kind of talked about it at one point. It's like maybe we don't have the wedding ceremony, and just like we were having a hard time, And what we ended up doing was just pushing it a little bit. And one of the things that kind of made me think was like, but it's important, like that ceremony may not seem important to us intellectually, but that's bringing the families together. Like we all go there. That's a ceremony. We break bread. Those ceremonies mean a lot to the human heart, to the community and things. So I think that is like when we deny them with death, and just go, don't do anything. I'll do, and it's like, well, that ceremony is just as much, maybe more or so for the people kind of left behind here. So have you thought about what you want to have happen to you when you pass away? Is that?
I have. So I remember when my brother died, nobody in our family knew what he wanted except for me, because he and I randomly happened to be watching a National Geographic show about different funeral customs around the world. And I remember him being really turned off by open caskets and all of the embalming techniques. Yeah. And he said, I think when I die, I just want to be cremated. And I remember just like, okay, whatever, dude. And then like when he was gone and they were like, what do you want to do? And my parents, obviously completely overcome with grief, they had no idea. And I just kind of like raised my hand and I was like, I actually know. I happen to know. I remember this conversation from 5 years ago. So for me, I'm definitely of the mindset that anything that can be donated, donate it. I don't need it anymore. I don't want it. And then up until recently, I really was just cremation. But recently in New York State, they passed a law that allows human composting now. So I know like that's an option. Because I knew that cremation is actually really bad for the environment. So I'm like, well, I don't want that to be like my last thing to the universe. To be like, screw you, Earth. So I'm still trying to figure out, if aquamation, which is basically the same as cremation, just using water, which is supposed to be a little bit better. Or even like I'm very much either cremation, aquamation, or some sort of green burial even. Where you just go back into the earth. I also don't like the idea of open casket, embalming. It just kind of freaks me out. So, but something as natural as possible is kind of my goal. So, and I've been joking because I have dark humor to cope with things. But it's like, we have my grandparents' ashes on the mantle, my great uncle's ashes on the mantle. We got my brother's ashes. And I'm like, once my parents go, I'm like, I'm gonna have to start like a sand art collection or something. Like put you all in like one box and like do sand art. Right. And my mom is like, you should totally do that. That's so funny. So we'll see.
Yeah, that could be on your museum too. You have your museum of Victoria
like, this is my mom. No. So I have dark humor.
Right. That's funny. It's funny because it's not even legal, but part of like me, I'd really like just to like take my body out and leave it for the buzzards, leave it for the flies, because it's like burial. Nature has fed me. Like, why do we deny returning it? I'm dead. Like they can't. I don't know what they're going to do with my organs. Like I'm a problem drinker. There's nothing that's going to be saved. it's going to go in the rubbish heap anyways. Like, give it to the worms and stuff. But
Yeah.
I know people get turned into trees now, and there's all kinds of interesting ones.
I love that idea. Like the, instead of a cemetery, though I love cemeteries, like a forest, and being like, this tree is grandma, and this tree is grandpa. I love that. So I would love it if someday that really like took off a bit more. The only problem is there's no legislation protecting things like that right now. So like technically someone could chop down Johnny's tree, technically, whereas like cemeteries are protected. So we just have a little bit of a ways to go for that.
Right. Yeah, amen. So maybe we can transition here to the feminine macabre. So, and do I say that right? Is it macabre?
I say macabre, but I have British friends that say macabre. So
because that's like, there's a ray at the end that seems strange that we're omitting, but we're Americans. We talk funny. So I wonder, like, generally, like, speaking, I guess it's not so much just related to the journal, but what do you think it is about like the macabre that kind of resonates so profoundly with humans? I mean, we've talked a bunch about death, so I guess there's that fascination, but is there anything else that?
I think that at least from what I've noticed, like looking at history, because a lot of the topics in the feminine macabre have to revolve around the occult, Ouija boards, spiritualism, things like that. I noticed that it always we see an increased interest in it during times of turmoil and hardship. The spiritualist movement really kind of took off after the Civil War. And then it kind of faded away. And then, in the early 20th century, you had the Spanish flu and World War I. All of a sudden, there was this big interest in it again. We even had something called Ouija mania during like the 1920s, where, women were being hospitalized because they were so addicted to using the Ouija boards. And then, again, like it kind of like goes down again. Then during the Vietnam War, interest, at least in Ouija boards, skyrockets again. And it actually outsells Monopoly at Christmas time as the number one board game. And then after the COVID pandemic, or even throughout the COVID pandemic, we see this really big interest again in spiritualism, Ouija boards, any sort of memorabilia that has to do with Ouija boards, spiritualism, things like that. They're hot commodity items right now. They're really, really popular. People are just interested in them. And I think kind of going back to this idea of, like not all ghosts have to be scary. Or, hoping that there's enough, natural wild places out there for Sasquatch to be lurking. I think it allows people an escape from the mundane nature of life, but also the uncertainty of life. So if you can focus on the macabre or true crime or weird history or just things that are just enough removed from you to distract you, I think people really gravitate towards that. Not only right now, but kind of like all throughout the last 150 years or so, at least, if not even beyond that.
Sure. Well, I think there's also the safety of getting into, to read it in a book or, watch a video, whatever it is. If you're not experiencing it, but you get that secondhand like ability to kind of go, okay, well, I can turn this off at any point. Or,
yeah, exactly. I'm not going to use a Ouija board, but I'll read about one.
I know my wife always forbids me. I'm like, we can get a Ouija board. She's like, you cannot get a Ouija board. You'll never be able to get rid of it. What do you think about... And I know that, so it's the journal is all female writers. Is it just female writers and the topics kind of range, or is it mostly related then to also kind of what the right term is to make it to narrow in my question here, right? If it was true crime, would they all be female? Like, would they all be killer moms, or would they is it or is it just kind of whatever topic it might be, and it just happens to be a female writer?
Kind of really is just whatever topic someone feels inspired to write about. Really the only prerequisite is that you have to we do female and non-binary. And that's just because at least in the paranormal community, there's really not a lot of women represented really anywhere, whether it's on TV or at larger conventions and paracons. The community is very much a sausage fest. And it's always the same. It is like, that is the perfect term for it. And it's always the same, like probably like 6 or 7 guys that you see over and over and over again.
Sure.
And like, after a while, you're like, how much information can they be like sharing? And they only have one perspective. And like, I would feel like after a while, you get tired of seeing the same people over and over again.
Sure.
But I was getting bitter about seeing these same people up there and like knowing so many amazing women in the community that were doing fascinating research. But nobody knows about it because for whatever reason. So I was like, I can't produce a TV show. I don't have the means to do that. I can't really put on a convention. I don't have the means to do that either. But I know how to put books together and I know how to make them look pretty and I know how to get them out there. So I just did a random call for submissions. To be like, hey, if you have anything, witchcraft, tarot, hauntings, dark history, folklore, death culture, anything, send it over. And for the very first volume, we had over 100 submissions. So it was clear very early on that this was something that they liked the idea of it. We just came out with our 6th volume this year. We're currently accepting submissions for volume 7. And it's been really cool to see the community kind of like come alive because like they're just books. They're just books. But like we've been able to do a few retreats where some of the ladies are able to go. We went to the Lizzie Borden house one year. We went to Gettysburg last year. And I've learned that several ladies have like connected in real life and they've gone out of their way to like vacation with one another and get like actually like hang out as friends. So it's been really cool to be able to not only, provide a space for women to share their writing, but also a way for them to find a community. When especially the paranormal community is very much, so much gatekeeping going on. And a lot of doors get closed in women's faces simply because they're not on TV, or they're not one of the guys on TV, or they're not, featured in one of these paracons. So it's been fun to be able to watch it grow and kind of like take on a life of its own, just from this little idea of me being bitter about people not being invited to these events, and something beautiful came from the bitterness.
Right. Very good. It's so funny. I was talking to I forget who was having the conversation with, but I was like, you can tell like people that are successful versus not. Almost always, I don't know. So I probably spent like 20 hours on this show so far talking about failure generally. Is one of my favorite topics, because I think like what you learn so much about yourself, about other people. Because a lot of times right after you're bitter about it, right? You're human, you feel this certain way about this thing, but it's the people that then do some like introspection and go, okay, what can I do about it? So it's funny. I had, and I'll never mention the show. I'm lucky to have very few of these shows that I felt like, oh, that didn't go well. And I honestly, I think it's 2 that I went after and went, that really did not go well, and one of them, unfortunately, was kind of last week as we're recording this, and I was like, how did it go? And I was like, it didn't really go very well. And, I'm not sure, I'm like, I don't know if anyone would notice, but I didn't feel like, there was like a real connection made, like we really got into anything. And so then she kind of went about doing her thing. My wife's like super busy. So actually how you were saying, I have to be busy. My wife's very like, I have to go do this. She's a nurse. She works at a cancer hospital. Then she goes and trains people on insulin pumps. Then she's working on her doctorate. So she's writing her. So she's like, the breadwinner, the one that keeps the family afloat. And I do podcasting and fiction writing. But she went to the room and he was doing whatever back there. And I kind of was like, okay, they ate dinner. I'm like, okay, I need to get prepared for my next shows. I always take the last couple of weeks off of the year, but I'm like, okay, I need to prepare. Like, I can't let that happen. Like, that's on me. It's like my show. I need to figure out how to do that better. And so we went, and then she teased me because she's like, oh, what are you doing? Are you coming to the room late? I'm like, I was preparing for all my next shows, like getting everything ready, and I make sure you don't have that happen. She's like, yeah, that's good. At least you're not whining about it anymore. And I'm like,
Give
She said it more off color than that, actually. But she's like the sweetest human in the world. But she's also tough. So especially if you're married to her. Yeah. So I think transitioning then to killer moms. So I guess generally to transition in, what do you think it is? I guess moms, but even just women in general, because there's there's shows dedicated to women murdering their husbands and and whatnot, right? What do you think it is about because there's not the equivalent dad show, right? You usually
No.
and maybe that's your next book. I don't know. Maybe Killer Dads comes next, but but it doesn't seem culturally we're not as fascinated with. Maybe because guys were just more violent generally as it is. But what do you think it is about female in general that's so intriguing for us?
I mean, I think because the idea of a killer woman in general, but particularly a killer mom, I think it goes against the preconceived notion in society of what a woman is supposed to be, and particularly what a mom is supposed to be.
Sure.
You're literally bringing life into this world.
Yeah.
And you should be, nurturing and, protecting the child, and you're the mama bear. And then all of a sudden to have a mother in a way, turn on her children, in a way, we see that there is something wrong with you. This is not natural. There is nothing right about this. And so I think, because we see it as the ultimate sin in a way, murder is wrong no matter what.
Right.
But when it's a mom doing it to her children, it's like the ultimate crime, the ultimate betrayal of not just a mother's love, but a mother's role.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very interesting writing this book, because when I first approached it, I approached it in a very black and white mentality that, you're all pure evil. There's a special place in hell reserved for each and every one of you. And almost immediately, as I was working on this, I realized that was not the case, and that in many instances, it's very gray in the middle, and that so many of these women knew that there was something wrong with them. They desperately sought help from either their spouses or from medical professionals, and they just happened to fall through the cracks. And it was just so eye-opening for me. That's one thing I love about writing these books, is that I get to learn so much. And this book in particular, it was hands down the most difficult book I've ever written in my entire life. But I learned so much. And I think it made me a more empathetic person, because it did make me stop and think. A great example is Casey Anthony's on the cover. She's one of the most hated women in America. So it was very interesting to do a chapter on her. Another great example is Andrea Yates. I remember when both the Casey Anthony and Andrea Yates's trials were going down, and I was a weird kid, so I watched them.
Sure.
I was very interested in these things happening.
Was this also at 12? 12 years old at that show?
Probably around there, actually. I don't know. But and it just was so interesting that, especially in Andrea Yates's case, that I can't say that you're pure evil and there's a special place in hell reserved for you. There were so many facets to this story and so many things that went wrong. And that was the case for a lot of the moms in this book. So it was really interesting for me to approach this as a mom. I have a 4-year-old son, so reading a lot of these police reports and autopsy files and newspaper articles, it was very, very difficult. But I do think, I tried so hard to make it not exploitive, and I really wanted to sort of inspire conversations surrounding mental health and women's health, particularly postpartum, because we don't talk about it. If a woman is experiencing postpartum depression, or the baby blues or anything like that, people ignore it, because, you're healthy, your baby's healthy, you should be happy. Never mind that you're sleep deprived, you're questioning everything you do. All of a sudden you're responsible for this tiny human being. You're trying to keep them alive, and it's very stressful. I was lucky enough that my husband had paid paternity leave. So he was with me for the first like 2.5, 3 months of our son's life. If I didn't have that, I can very easily see how someone would be struck down by depression because it is so stressful.
Sure.
And I always say motherhood is a thankless job. Like, yeah, we get Mother's Day, but it is very much a thankless job. And we are expected to love our children unconditionally and to just like kind of like grin and bear it and be happy. And there are instances where there are times where moms might struggle to love their children, or there might not be that unconditional love. So again, it's a very difficult book to get through. But I do think that it is very important to be able to look at these cases, not only the modern ones, but also the historic ones, and to kind of look and see similarities, differences, and kind of like how we can better approach postpartum mental health and just mental health in general, not necessarily just postpartum, and kind of start talking about it more. I think people are getting more open about talking about postpartum depression and just mental health in general, but we have leaps and bounds that we have to go before I think we should be where we are.
Sure. No, it's funny when you're saying that. It says my wife's Chinese, and so the tradition in China is a big place, right? I mean, you've been there, so it's not everyone doesn't do. Yeah, exactly. It's not just. It's like anytime I go somewhere, they're like, oh, Americans all do this, and I'm like, America's a big place. Everyone doesn't do the same thing. So I try to say, but my wife's family, the tradition is that first month after the baby's born, like a mom comes and stays. Like my wife's mom came and stayed with us. She cooked. It was very, very particular meals. Actually, my wife was like losing her mind with how particular they were. And there's a certain like tradition, like she's not supposed to shower. So she would actually like when her mom would like leave for like the afternoon or something. She's like, I'm going to take a shower, And actually her mom admitted that she did the same thing. So there's like this cat and mouse game to it too, which is fun. But it's lovely in the sense that because I've said, I forget, I think Menendez brothers like came in the news again the other day. And there's the, I guess it's now there's some more evidence that they were abused. And however someone feels about that particular case, it's hard to run a society without some kind of self-accountability. Right. So it's easy to go, oh, you know what? They were abused, so you get to kill their parents or whatnot. Right. You can do that. But the better way is also to look downstream is how do we like prevent, like mental health is important. But now I think we kind of get into the, I'll just go see a therapist and get on some drugs or whatever it is. But it's like, well, what's the stuff kind of upstream we can do? Like I think her mom coming and staying that month. Well, so now she didn't have to cook. She didn't have to clean. I had time off too for paternity leave. So I get to be around. And it was still hard on my wife because then she's breastfeeding. No one else can do it for you, Exactly. So,
and if you're not breastfeeding, you gotta pump those breasts. So I know you're awake.
Right. So it's hard. So it is like when it's that village mentality, at least you can make it easier. And then at least I'll feel together versus I'm sure a lot of moms, I mean, I can't imagine how lonely it must feel. Not saying, I mean, I'm sure single moms too, but even just moms where the husband doesn't have time off and has to be out working long hours. And then now there's stress because now there's a baby, you know what I mean? And like it's a hard chore. I try to tell that to my son one day because, there's always like what's the difference between the guys and the girls? And I'm like, the real difference, right? Because everything's a bell curve. You can put it over, get, this person's a little stronger, this, whatever, however you want to do it. But I like the real like superpower women have that we don't have and we will never have is that they control the next generation of the world inside of them. And we can't ever know how that feels. We can't know like physically how it feels, mentally how it feels. Like we never know. So that is the thing that's their superpower. And that's the thing we need to respect and support however we can, rest of the stuff, okay, debate however you want. People, families figure that out, relationships figure that out as they go. But like that's the one I'm like, I don't know. I like to tease my wife because I'm like, oh, I know William slept all night, like right when he first came home. She's like, he didn't sleep all night. I was waking up with him. But it gets her goat every time I say that. That's why she makes these mean comments to me, is because I like
that is fair then. No. That is fair.
Was there any stories that when you were researching it that kind of shocked you, like that you weren't aware of, that you came across that, you know?
The one that really stuck with me the most is because a lot of them are somewhat similar, but the one that really got me thinking was Margaret Garner, where she was an enslaved woman. This was just before the American Civil War. And she was married, or she was married, but they were separated because they lived on 2 different plantations. And she had children, and eventually they managed to escape. And they were able to get up into Ohio, which technically was the North. But at this time, the only guarantee of freedom was getting to Canada, because your, enslaver could send men up into the North, find you, and bring you back. There was no laws protecting you from that, despite the fact that you were in the North, and you were in a free state. So Margaret, made her way to Ohio. She was in a safe house waiting to continue up into Canada, and they were discovered. And instead of allowing her children to be brought back into slavery, she murdered her daughter. I don't know if it was the youngest one, but she had several boys. She murdered her daughter before she could take her other children's lives. They basically were arrested. And it became this huge, news story all across the country, where abolitionists used it as kind of a platform. Like, look at what slavery drove this woman to do. And then it was this big debate of, if you are trying her as a murderer, you're acknowledging that she is a person and not property. So it was this very interesting case. But for me as a mom reading this, I hope that it inspires women to stop and think, if you were in that situation, what would you do? Because in a lot of these chapters, you can very easily say you're a terrible person. You're a sadistic human being. You found pleasure out of this. But in many instances, particularly, Margaret Garner and several other women, they were doing what they thought was right and what they thought was the only way to protect their children. So it just goes to show you how absolutely abhorrent and horrific slavery was for these people, that death was a better option for her child than going back. So for me, that one in particular really stuck with me. And it does get you thinking, like, if you were ever in a situation such as that, what would you do? What choice would you make in that single moment when your enslaver is on the other side of that door and he's ready to drag you back to, absolute carnage? How are you going to save your child? How are you going to protect your child? And that is what she chose to do. So that was really, like, as I was working on that chapter, it was just very sobering. And the fact that it didn't happen that long ago, like it was the 1860s, is just mind-boggling to me. So definitely Margaret Garner's story was just really, really profound and really stuck with me. In like the midst of all of these women, she really stuck out. It was almost like a beacon for me to, like, I really wanted to tell her story and to get it out there, that, it's not black and white. There is that gray area of, she was doing the best she could with what horrific cards she was dealt.
Sure. It reminds me of, you would see, and they probably happen in real life too, but it's kind of a trope in like fantasy or kind of medieval kind of stories where, like, the castle is going to be sacked, right? And they're like, oh, they give their kids the poison or whatever to save them from that. So, yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. Was there any, so knowing you have a dark sense of humor, was that Is there any stories? I know none of them are funny, right? I mean, we're talking about moms that kill, but was there any that are like darkly funny, or any anecdotes that were like darkly funny for you?
Oh, yes. So the one, I might be mispronouncing her name because I don't speak Italian. But Leonarda Cianciulli, I'm going to say that's her name. She was also known as the soap maker of Correggio. Again, I could be mispronouncing that.
Sure.
But basically, I have her in here in the chapter. So the book is separated into different categories of what drove these women to commit these crimes based off of their motives. So either for love, for money, for faith, due to depression. And then one of the sections is for their children. So Leonarda didn't kill her children, but she killed for her son. And allegedly, this is all based off of her firsthand account. Like, she wrote like a ridiculously long narrative while she was in jail. But a lot of people think it was so she could plead insanity. So she tried to make it as ridiculous as possible. But according to her story, and I shouldn't laugh about this, but dark humor. Her 3 victims were allegedly drained of their blood. Their blood was put into a mixture of, quote, flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, and a bit of margarine, and made into cookies that she gave her son to protect her son from being enlisted into the Italian military during World War II, as well as all of her neighbors. And then she would cook their fat down and make soap and sell the soap to make some extra money.
So if, assuming we take her word for it, there's people that are bathing with dead person fat soap. So that's, yeah. Pleasant thoughts. So I hope people are watching this at night. You're gonna shower before bed. There you go.
Yeah, enjoy. Have you eating like a little like chocolate bonbon or something? It's like cherry filled on the inside. You're like, what is that? Yeah.
Right,
no, I just, when I was like researching this and like I was like reading her account and I was just like, this is really gross. I'm like, she goes into like full on detail of like the recipe. How do you make these cookies and how do you make this soap? And it was just like, this is ridiculous. I hope it's made up. But
my grandmother's full Italian. My dad's half Italian, half British Isles, Scottish, Irish, kind of all of that, around there. But the Italian side, it reminds me very much of my grandma, because she would find a use for whatever it is. Like, you're not going to waste. I have this body. Well, what do I do with the body? Very practical,
Yeah, it's very, waste not, want not. It's admirable, I guess. So I feel like that was like, that's at the very end of the book. And I feel like it's a bit of like a palate cleanser from the rest, because it's so ridiculous. You're like, this has to be fake. So I'm hoping that it is, and that she was just like totally like throwing everything at the wall and hoping some of the spaghetti sticks or something.
Right. That is funny. And I'm glad you mentioned that. So I know it was broken down into like motivations. And because I had it yesterday, so I got the chance to kind of peruse through today. Was there any that, I know you said a lot, you kind of sound like the humanity and the empathy and things. Was there any that did strike you as kind of that capital E kind of evil, or was it that they almost didn't feel like the humanity seemed like it was not there anymore?
So for me, the one that kind of like broke me, where like I had to take a break. I literally stopped writing, went and I took a shower to just like get it off of me. Mm-hmm. And then I took a break for several weeks, was Angela Camacho. And I might be mispronouncing that again. I've only ever read it. But she was a woman, and this is more of a contemporary case. And she's in this section for faith, that she technically did not murder her children, but she held them down and she provided the weapons. Basically, she had 3 small children, and she and her boyfriend were, puffing, doing various drugs. And while in some sort of crazed stupor, they became convinced that their 3 children were witches, that they were like spouting incantations and spells. And they ended up basically cutting them all up into tiny pieces with a machete. And they ranged in age, I think, from like 8 years old down to like 18 months. So, it was absolutely horrible. And while I was researching it, I stumbled upon autopsy photos, which was just that. It was that moment where I literally just shut my laptop and I walked away. But like for me, it was just so horrific. And just knowing that like you literally, it's not that you stood by and watched it happen. You held your children down. And like the police described when they, walked in on the scene, that they saw what they thought was a doll on the bed, and it wasn't. And just, for me, for whatever reason, that case really, it stuck with me. Unlike Margaret Garner, where it stuck with me for like, kind of like, almost like, not inspiring reasons, but just like it was really, it shined a light on a dark piece of history that I think we don't talk enough about anymore. This was just in my mind. I was like, this is pure evil. I cannot walk away. Like, I cannot forget this. I cannot forget these little faces. And it's like, she's not this famous case. She's not an Andrea Yates. She's not a Casey Anthony. But what she did was just as horrific. For whatever reason, we don't know about it. Nobody knows about it. Nobody says these kids' names anymore. There's really, no one talking about it. There is a little memorial for them, in their neighborhood. But aside from that, they've been relatively forgotten, which is why, in a way, I wanted to present this book as very cut and dry. This is the facts. These are what happened, and be able to share the stories for the victims' sakes, because in many instances, we don't have photos of them. We don't really know much about them other than the fact that their mothers decided to end their lives. So that chapter in particular was really, really hard for me. And again, like, I don't really know why, because like it's a whole book of just messed up stuff, but for whatever reason,
right, sure.
That one in particular really always stuck out to me. So that's just that was a capital E for evil, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. It's funny as you said, because you had mentioned like gatekeepers and stuff earlier, right? And the same 5, guys up at these, conventions and things. It's funny because like you really notice that like if you watch the shows, right? Like I like to, my wife loves true crime. So she like listens to the podcast. She's always driving. So whenever we go drive places, she always has them on. I like them too, but she's like, that's her jam, right? She's doing that. And I like the ghost stuff. Like I really like to listen to like the ghost stories, things. And the podcasts tend to be pretty great. They give you a good wide variety if you can find the right ones. But the shows, it tends to be like the same like 10 ghost stories all the time, right? And like in the true crime, like the television, kind of the same. And it's just like where the cryptids, I have the Bigfoot kind of behind me somewhere here. It'll be like, the same sightings all the time. And then you realize like, there's so much more. There's so much things going on. It's like, why do we like Lizzie Borden, this very interesting story, but do we need to, does every show about a ghost always have to talk about Lizzie Borden, or is there like 18 other stories that we could be talking about, or true crime kind of being the same? Is there other things we could be, delving into? So, that's a horrific case. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything like so there's that darkness, right? You had to like peer into the abyss with this book, right? Like, and I know that time was troubling, but is there something like you gain out of it? So like that peering into the, examining the darkness?
I think for me, it was walking away, knowing that when I first approached this project, thinking, you're all evil, I already hate all of you, and being able to walk away with, I'm not so sure about that, or if anyone ever brought up, a famous case, I'd be like, well, actually, there's more to it than that. I'm not saying what she did was right, but there was a lot of, moving parts that just kind of led to a tragedy. Again, we go back to talking about, changing and growing and evolving. And I feel like I worked on this for about 2 years, 2 full years of researching this. And I think in that span, I definitely became much more empathetic to these cases and to just moms in general. I think becoming a mom myself back in 2020, I became very much aware of like seeing a mom struggling with a temper tantrum in a grocery store or a baby crying on an airplane.
Sure.
Like those instances where like the mom is absolutely mortified and she's so embarrassed. And it's not that big of a deal. It's fine. We all did it. We all have spawn that are doing the same thing. And I feel like, working on this, it kind of added to that level of empathy for me where it was just like, give people the grace that they need to do the best that they can. And if a new mom is struggling, listen to her. Don't belittle her feelings. Don't tell her it's all in your head or, oh, but you should be happy. Because if you're not happy, that's okay. It happens to a lot of us. And trying to be there for them. And again, just really talking about the mental health. Good, bad, otherwise, like I remember after my son was born, you would go to the doctors and they would, you'd fill out a survey and they'd say like, are you feeling suicidal or homicidal? And I always think like, that's so stupid. No one's going to admit yes. But that's the extent of like talking about women's postpartum mental health. So I do think that it's definitely made me a bit more empathetic. And just, I always try to think the best in people. I struggle a lot sometimes, I'm not going to lie. But just, again, walking away, being like, what, it's not all black and white. There's always more to the story. 9 times out of 10, there's always more to the story. And I think if we just sat down and tried to dissect that and figure out why, I think a lot of issues could be addressed. But we're just as a society too afraid to talk about it for whatever reason. Whether we're afraid of mental health or afraid of women or afraid of both.
Sure. No, thank you for that. It's funny. It kind of reminds me like there's that old philosophical question. They'd be like, oh, if you could go back in time and kill baby Hitler, like, would you,
Would you do it?
Would you do it, And I've always thought like, if you can go back in time and then Hitler's a baby, there's a lot of things you could do to maybe try not to make him grow up to be Hitler, Yeah. And that still may not
accept him into the art school.
So no, you need to make sure this kid goes
Get
there.
this kid in.
But it's I guess there's two things. One, I don't know, like he wasn't the only Nazi, right? So I don't know, killing Hitler, like if you really actually stopping Nazi or just, one of the other like horrible Nazis like rises to power and maybe doesn't do all the drugs and is even worse than, Hitler ends up being. So it's one of those you never know. It's kind of butterfly effect. The flip side though is sometimes when you think about it and you really go, oh, there is certain people that seem like they're kind of pure evil or like almost like preternatural evil. If that's the case, then maybe there is no like accept them into art school and things are fine. I tend to think, it's hard to live a life that way. I always say like if you don't believe in redemption, like you might as well just throw all humans out because we are going to need redemption at some point. Ability to come back from making mistakes. Most of us aren't, Hitlers, right? I mean, that's basically none of us. Yeah. But, and most of us aren't murderers, but we all do things, right? We all make mistakes. But it's interesting that, the way you described it, because if you peer into all this darkness, you spend 2 years doing it. And that you still found some light in it, and the fact that you found some empathy. Found some, humanity in people that like so often we go, oh, there's no humanity, there. And then there's still like darkness, which actually maybe makes it even scarier. I think it makes it even harder to deal with.
Clickety clack, clickety clack, tickety clack.
Oh, hello. You caught me right as I was putting the finishing touches on my epic absurdist satire, Pirates of Appalachia. And now it is time for the long road to publication and the long editing process. As writers, we spend tons of time editing our work. the hardest part, I think, of the editing process was really like the proofreading, the copy editing, because you were so immersed in it. I've just spent 13 years immersed in Pirates, got it all together, went through, edited it front and back by characters, all these different asymmetrical ways. And still, it's going to have typos in it. And they're going to horrify me one day if I ever find those in the actual printed edition. The way I combat that is with EditGPT. You found today's sponsor. The link is on the screen now. I'm going to put it here. Here's the link. If you're on the podcast forum and you can't see me pointing up at that link, if you're on a podcast, you're really missing out. I'm really animated with my hands. But if you can't find it on there, feel free. You'll find it in the description. It helps support the show. It helps restock the bar. Helps keep this guy happy so that we can keep putting all these shows out there for all of you. Thanks for everything. Let's get back to the writing, because Pirates of Appalachia is not going to finish itself. The one thing EditGPT cannot do is save the file for you. So I'm going to make sure to save that now. So I want to get back to my work. You get back to your regularly scheduled programming. So now that we've had all this really super fun talk,
so bright and peppy.
there's a very special portion of the show I call shots. Rapid fire questions. You can or cannot do shots. That part's up to you, but the questions are kind of shots to go through. So,
okay.
All right, you ready?
I think so.
Okay.
I should take a shot.
Very good. Go ahead, take a shot. All right, I'll take a drink too.
There you go.
Wet the palate. Okay, so the first part is going to be special trivia here for you. So we've talked a lot about, like darkness and killer moms. So I thought the logical place to go next would be awesome dads. So 5-ish questions here. You see if you can name the awesome dad that I've come up with.
Oh, God.
All right. So this awesome dad has starred in the longest running TV show in history. I think this is like a sitcom kind of show, not including the news and things, and shares a name with a famous Greek writer.
Oh, God, this is going to be so embarrassing.
Don't.
I don't watch TV.
You didn't even get that hint. Oh,
no.
The Simpsons. It's Homer Simpson.
Oh, gosh, Homer Simpson. Okay, I was thinking like real people, but yeah, Homer Simpson. I'm going to take a drink for that.
Very good. All right, so you ready for the next one?
No.
They're not all TV. A few of them are TV here, but there's a few none.
Okay. Dads. I got to think dads. Okay.
Dads, yeah. So this awesome dad was busy with 3 boys of his own until he met a lovely lady and they formed
the Brady Bunch.
You nailed it. All right.
I don't actually know what the dad's name is in the Brady Bunch, though. Mr. Brady.
What was the dad's name? Mr. Brady.
He's just a man named Brady, right?
I know. I was like Peter. I'm like, no, that's one of the boys. I don't know. Yeah, I'm
gonna Google it as soon as we're done. We're like, what is the dad's name?
Right. Yeah, we'll get to the bottom of this mystery. All right. This is the last TV related one. This awesome dad sold women's shoes and once scored 4 touchdowns in a single high school football game.
I'm also not a sports person. This is so embarrassing.
Well, it's a fictional character. He really didn't, but he talks about it all the time in the show. Sold women's shoes. He was married with children.
Oh, someone is married with children?
Al Bundy.
Okay.
Married with children. Yeah, that was a thing. I once scored 4 touchdowns in high school.
That's so funny.
I haven't watched the show in forever. I think I saw some clips came on and I was watching it. My wife was like, "What in the world are you watching?" And then she recognized it. I was like, okay. Awesome. So this awesome dad was a protagonist in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm so embarrassed right now. I can visualize him. It's not Boo Radley.
It rhymes with Abagus.
Atticus Finch. Oh my God.
Atticus Finch. There
Atticus
you go. Another
Finch.
point
Oh
on
my
the board.
gosh. That's like a half point. I said Boo Radley first. Terrible. Atticus Finch. Atticus Finch. Oh.
So, all right. And okay, here's the last one. So most important, double points for this one.
Oh, God.
You know what I should actually do? Maybe after the show, I'll start to do this. I should put up a leaderboard with the fake points for all the people on the show.
Oh, man. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing.
All right. So this one, most important. All right. So thinking cap.
Okay.
This awesome dad hosts a whiskey-themed podcast featuring writers from every nook and cranny of the literary globe and is known for making a fool of himself.
I think it's William R.
Oh, it is! Double points. Double points. And speared fingers.
Yeah.
Very good. Moving on from the trivia here. What's a guilty pleasure?
I read dirty books.
There you go.
Yep.
Very good. Well, that's perfectly fine. I've had dirty book writers on,
Perfect.
I'd be very happy to have more on. So, what's the biggest risk you ever took?
Probably moving to China, which is probably a boring answer because I've already talked about it, but moving to China because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, that's moving. It's funny. It's like there's kind of the moving to a country that already speaks the language you speak, or even like if you know it somewhat, right, where you can get by. There's moving somewhere where you don't, and then really
I
use to
can't
make your life there.
Read the signs right now. Like I can't read anything. So
right, yeah. Awesome. So, what's the biggest failure?
Ooh. I don't know if it's necessarily a failure, but it felt like a failure to me was when I moved to Russia 4 months after my brother died. I got married, we moved to Russia, and really, I was in such a deep, dark depression that 2 months later, we moved back home for a while because I couldn't do it. And I said, I felt like I left. I wanted to go back out because I knew that's what Jed would want me to do. And I felt like I came home with my tail between my legs. That's how I describe it to people. So. Yeah,
sure. Oh, I think it's understandable, though. I think sometimes we try. It's like you were talking about earlier, right? It's like, we want to move on, move, dude, go do this thing. And sometimes you're not ready.
I was not ready.
Yeah. Amen. All right. And we've talked I was going to ask you, have you witnessed anything inexplicable? But we kind of talked about that already. So let's skip it. So we have a question from a subscriber here. So let's see if I can read it because I don't wear my glasses on the show because of the ring lights pop on. So, okay. My wife has recently taken an interest in true crime and watches Snapped every night before going to bed. It makes me a little nervous, but she smiles ear to ear when she watches it and assures me that it's just good fun watching men get what they deserve. My question is my wife plotting to murder me? And if so, should I consider sleeping in the guest bedroom or just accept my fate, throw away the honey to-do list, and slip into sweet oblivion?
Great question. I always say you have to, do a little bit of reflection. Do you think that you are in danger of this? And if so, you might want to move down the hall to the guest room for a little bit. I mean, put a chair underneath the door.
The chair under the door, right?
So, but I'm sure you're fine. She's like most women. I feel like most women love true crime. We love watching Snapped, Forensic Files. We're obsessed with it. It's just, I feel like it's just it's one of those things what married men you just have to be okay with it.
Yeah. Amen. I would just go to bed.
And stay on her good side.
Right. We were talking. I told my family last night we were having dinner, and I was like, tomorrow I'm, interviewing you, right? And I'm like, she wrote this book, Killer Moms, and then we're just talking, right? The family's just chatting around, and it was about people how they get caught with things, and my wife keeps going, no, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do this. So these very particular things that she wouldn't do.
Yep.
And I'm like, you never said you just wouldn't murder someone. I'm starting to feel a little nervous now because you have to be like, I wouldn't murder someone. And you wouldn't have to worry about those other things.
You wouldn't get caught. You wouldn't get. And it's so funny because like you'd be watching this thing and they're like, but they left their fingerprint on the doorknob, and you're like, what an idiot.
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
I wouldn't do that. I've watched enough of Forensic Files to know that's a no.
Very true. Very true. Awesome. It's the last one here for our shots. Fact or crap? Podcasts have officially peaked on this podcast at precisely this moment.
Yes, it can't get any better. This is it.
Very good. Very good. Awesome. Thank you for that. So I did mention this pregame. I know I mentioned it in my little packet, but did you have something you could read for us today?
I do have a little bit. I don't know if it's too long, like what you would prefer. I have a little bit from the soap maker lady.
Oh, okay.
If you would be interested in that.
Absolutely.
It's about 1.5 pages long. Is that too long?
Oh, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Alrighty. So it's about halfway through the chapter. So I'm not going to be reading everything. So if people want to know more, you just have to buy the book.
Fair enough.
So again, I don't speak Italian, so I will apologize in advance if I say anything wrong. But Leonardo's newfound happy and somewhat successful life came to a screeching halt as World War II took hold of Europe in September 1939. Although Italy would remain neutral for another year, Leonardo's oldest son and unequivocally her favorite child, Giuseppe, expressed an interest in signing up for the Royal Italian Army. No doubt the memory of the fortune teller's words from decades ago, warning her that all of her children would die, came back to haunt her. Nightmares began to plague Leonardo, where a woman, some say it was her estranged mother, while others claim it was a Black Madonna, appeared to her each night and told her to sacrifice human lives to protect her son. If Leonardo was convinced of the power of the occult, she likely took these dreams very seriously, and in the fall of 1939, she acted on the spectral woman's orders. Leonardo's first victim was 73-year-old Faustina Setti, a spinster who had come to Leonardo to help her find a husband. Playing on the older woman's hope, Leonardo informed Faustina that she had found a possible match, a wealthy gentleman living just across the Adriatic Sea in the city of Pula in modern-day Croatia. She warned Faustina not to tell anyone where she was going until after she met her new husband, as a way to avoid any scandals. On the day she intended to depart, Faustina stopped at her friend's house, no doubt to say goodbye and thank you. Noticing that the older woman had colored her hair to look young, quote, she wanted to look like a child, Leonardo would later note, Leonardo invited Faustina in for a celebratory drink before she set out on her journey to her new husband. While drinking an elixir Leonardo had concocted, the illiterate Faustina wrote several postcards to her friends and family with the help of Leonardo, to be sent once she arrived in Pula, informing them that she was happy and not to worry about her. Then, as her drink took effect, Leonardo struck. While my victim was drinking an elixir I had prepared, I got an axe, placed myself behind my victim, and summoning my strength, struck the back of the neck. A rattle, nothing else. It was a master stroke that almost beheaded her. With Faustina's head likely hanging on by a bit of tissue and flesh, Leonardo moved to stand in front of her friend before pulling the head from the body with her own hands. She tossed the head into her kitchen sink before dragging the body to a nearby closet. Using a knife to cut the flesh and a hammer to break the bones, she divided Faustina's body into 9 easier-to-handle pieces: arms, legs, split in half at the knees, torso, and pelvis, along with the head still draining in the sink. I threw the pieces into a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred the mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush that I poured into several buckets and emptied in a nearby septic tank. Leonardo would eventually toss the bones into a nearby canal. While she worked on dismembering the woman's body, she gathered the blood in a large basin. Waiting for the blood to coagulate into a jelly-like consistency, Leonardo claimed to bake it in the oven before grinding it up and mixing it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine. According to her account of the murder, she would eventually use Faustina's blood to make pastries that she shared with her customers, as well as her son Giuseppe, believing the blood sacrifice would protect him. Now, some historians argue that Leonardo did not kill her friend Faustina Seti under the belief that sacrificing her would protect Giuseppe from dying in the war. Instead, they suggest she murdered the woman to rob her of her savings. It's believed that Faustina paid Leonardo 30,000 lira for helping to find her husband. For a short while, Leonardo may have believed that her human sacrifice had been enough to keep her beloved Giuseppe safe. But when the Italians officially entered World War II on June 10th, 1940, it was clear to Leonardo that she needed to offer another sacrifice to ensure her son's safety. The end.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they think it was for her life savings, but then she's like, oh, and I need to double down. You know, there's
okay, got it. Try again. Try again. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for coming on the show. So if people want to learn more about you, I can certainly link up the website, on the description here, so they can find it. But is there anywhere else you would direct them to?
So my social media is all at Spook-Eats. So that's like my old blog name that I've kind of kept. So Spook-Eats.com is where all of my books are available, as well as all of my appearances. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter is all at Spook-Eats. That's SPOOKEATS. I was trying to be witty and make it sound like spooky. Spooky-Eats, but it never works.
Yeah.
People are always like, Spooky-Eats. And I'm like, no, forget it. It's fine. Yeah. So, yeah. And I'm a millennial, so I'm always on social media. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm kind of on TikTok, but not really. It's more so like geriatric center of TikTok. So I don't tell people to follow me on TikTok. So thank you so much for having me on. This was so much fun.
Yeah, it was. And so it's last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. And the question I've taken to people, asking now is, what's something you've gained from reading, writing, whichever way you want to take it, that you don't think you would have gained otherwise?
Oh my gosh. I would say probably the desire to continue to share stories. Like when I'm not writing, I like to be like, I'm an empathetic person. I care. I'm very antisocial. Like I try to avoid people. Sure. I don't like being out in crowds. Like if I'm outside, I'll be like, it's too people-y out here, or I got to get back inside. But like when I get the opportunity to share people's stories, particularly women's stories, because that is really like my passion. So like my Harlots and Hauntings book focuses on women. The Feminine Macabre, every volume we have our her story section where we focus on a specific woman. And even the Killer Moms, it's like, I love being able to shine a light on these stories, give a voice to those who may have been voiceless or silenced, and being able to share that with other people and hope that people continue to say those names and tell those stories. There's that old saying that, a person dies twice. Once when your physical body dies, and then again when someone says your name for the last time. So like my hope with all of my books, but particularly like those female-centric books, is to kind of continue these women's legacies, good or bad, because, I feel like that's history. You need to share the good aspects of history as well as the bad, so we can kind of continue to progress and move forward and change and evolve and grow. Here it is. We've come full circle once again. So I would say, like for me, reading as a young kid, and even reading now, and just getting these cool people's stories, whether they're real or fictional, and then getting to share the stories as well, and just the knowledge that could have otherwise been forgotten, but it's still going by me writing it, people reading it, or someone gifting a book to someone else. And I however many, 9-10 years ago, I didn't think that was ever going to happen again. So it's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. Thank you so much for that. And it really is, stories and storytelling is so foundational to humans that's why people will be like, oh, why do you have someone with Bigfoot on? Yeah, that's ridiculous. And I'm just like, but there's a story there. So even if you don't think why are we fascinated by the monster in the woods? Why does it still happen? You know, if we're so advanced, you know. I like my aggressive air quotes.
Yes, quote unquote.
But so anyways, thank you so much for that. And again, thank you so much for coming on. This was a real blast. It was a pleasure getting the chance to get to know you and pick your brain and hear about all these, I mean, sometimes dark stories, but I think it's all part of the experience, right? That we have here as life. So thank you so much.
This was awesome. I mean, any show I can like drink and talk about weird stuff, I'm a happy girl.
Extra shots. You knew it was coming, and here it is. Who is your favorite awesome dad? Is it Homer? Is it Al Bundy? Is it this blathering author you've been listening to for the last 2-ish hours? Let us know down there in the comments. And if you're one of our friends listening, podcast form out there in the iTunes and so forth of the world, drop us a 5-star review, leave a comment with it or a question, and I will include that with one of our open bar lists for our author panel questions. If you like, I can include as a shot question if you want to send me something funny or brief and intriguing. Or if you have something more in-depth you have in mind, leave it on there, and I may even include it as our last call question, and maybe it'll become our permanent or semi-permanent last call question. So, so iTunes, 5-star review, post a question. I will find that question. I will find you, and I will encourage you, and I will give you a 5-star review from my heart by putting that question into the rotation. So thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.